I'm Bob, I'm an alcoholic. Well, there was a speaker back in the 70s and 80s that I listened to every chance I got. We didn't have recordings, we just listened. We went live, and his name was Chuck Chamberlain. And he sponsored my sponsor, Clancy, till Chuck died. And Chuck was brilliant. I don't know that there's ever been anyone that was as awake as Chuck Chamberlain. I mean, he was so brilliant. You had to be sober a couple years before you even started to understand what he was talking about. It was like you just... But Chuck used to say this, and he'd say it frequently, that there was one problem and it contained all problems. And that one problem was conscious and unconscious separation between me and you, me and God, me and life, even me and myself. That Wilson describes it in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions as a state of anxious apartness. And in our book, it talks about something that makes perfect sense to me. It says that at the root of all these troubles, of this separation, of all my troubles, is selfishness, self-centeredness, this obsessive self-concern. So the reason I'm separate from you is I got too much of me and my opinionations between me and you. I'm separate from God because I got too much of Bob between Bob and God. I'm separate from life. The alcoholics know a loneliness such as few do. It's the loneliness of separation. And oddly enough, the solution is given to us in the first tradition. But if that's true, then we're going to look at dismantling the thing that separates us. There was a great psychiatrist who was on our board of directors, board of trustees rather. He spoke at one of our international conferences. His name was Dr. Harry Thibault. He was very influential in the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he was brilliant. And he talked about the real problem of the alcoholic is we have these extreme egos. Just everybody has one, but ours is like on steroids. I mean, it's like Jesus. And that we must have ego reduction at depth. And then he also said, and this touches on the chronic nature of alcoholism. He talked about the amazing recuperative powers of the alcoholic ego. You can surrender, you can work the steps, you can get small, and it grows back. It grows back. I think my very being is like, in the States, we have toilets that have a tank in the back, and you flush it, and the tank empties out full of water. Well, that's when I work the steps. And then immediately I start filling up with me, right? And it's the default position is self-centered, selfish, self-seeking, self-grandizing, self-justifying, self, me. And so that's the problem. I think that's why the third step, you can have the best intention in the world. You can understand. Really understand that you must get your life out of the hands of the idiot that's been screwing it up all these years and still have an inability to do that. Because we must have ego reduction at depth. So when I was 4 years sober, I did my third inventory, and this was the first one I ever did using the big book and following the directions precisely. And I got to tell you, the first one, I got a lot of stuff off my chest, a lot of secrets out in the open. That was good. But the one in the book, it was a game changer for me. And it's designed to make me smaller. It's designed for ego reduction at depth. And so the inventory is laid out in 3 parts: resentments, fear, and sex. And in the resentment section, the book says it's the big deal. It's the tall pole in the tent when we first started this thing. It calls it the number one offender. It says it kills more alcoholics than anything else, maybe even more than alcohol. Because it is the source of great separation. Resentments are funny because they keep you hostage. Do you ever notice a couple things? They dominate and control your perception and what you see. Do you ever notice from the moment you get a resentment, that person can't do anything right from then on? That's impossible. But it takes your perception hostage. You freeze. I've hundreds of fifth steps where people have been hurt by one of their parents or something as a child, and 30 years later, they freeze framed that person as the same jerk they were 30 years, and they didn't change. They're still that. Because the ego demands to be right. Because what does the ego do the most? It judges. It's opinionation. It soothes. It tries to soothe me by telling me things that I know that aren't necessarily true. And so, in the resentment inventory, the book asks us to do 6 things. Now, there's people in this room going, hey, no, it's only 4. It's 6 things we're asked to do. Now, 4 of them are evidently involve writing. One of them is a prayer. And one of them is a crucial and vital change in perception or a realization. When we started into step 1, it talks about a place, and Chamberlain used to talk about this all the time. It says we learned we had to fully concede to our innermost self. We were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. There's a place inside of us where all of this must occur. It's not a cognizant thing, because if it was a cognizant thing, you'd go to a workshop on the 12 steps and get better. You would learn about the problem and then change it. But knowledge doesn't help people like us. That's one of the reasons I became a counselor, and I used to read a lot of that kind of stuff, and because my ego fancied that it would find power and transformation in knowledge. I never did. I never found that. I found fodder for my ego. It puffed me up into being the I know guy. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you sat down with your sponsor and he told you what your defects are and you go, oh my God, okay. From now on, I'm not going to be that way ever again. Wouldn't it, if the knowledge that you're pretty messed up and you're selfish and self-centered and self-obsessed, and you're resentful, if the knowledge of that could change it, we would have changed years ago. But we're stuck. We're in the bondage of self. So, first thing we do, if you go to page 64, first direction is down towards the bottom of the page. It says we listed, so you're going to, lists are usually down a page. I always tell the guys I sponsor, get a notebook, one that you can open so you have 2 pages across. And down the left hand, when it's open across 2 pages, go down the left-hand column, margin, put a name. Skip a few lines, put another name. Skip a few more lines, put another name. And I've run into this a couple times where guys just say, well, I really don't have any resentments. Yeah. Well, I'm going to be on that list before we're done, I can tell. Well, because the ego doesn't want it, because the ego reads ahead, and he knows that most of these people are going to have to make amends to. So I don't have any resentments. And I don't want to even admit to myself that I'm that weak, that somebody could get to me, that I'm that self-conscious, that I'm that pathetic. So I don't want to have resentments, but I do. So I have to come at them from the flank. I'll say, okay, no resentments. Well, let's do something different. Let's make a list of all the stupid people. And the minute I say that, they all get a look on their face like, oh, that'd be a long list. Let's make a list of the people someone should straighten out. Let's make a list of the people that owe the world and you an amends. make a list of the wrong people. It's quite a list. We could do it for you. We won't. You need to do it yourself. Put your mother, father, siblings, ex before the ex before the ex, boss before the boss, and it would just dwindle down to pretty much everybody you ever knew, because we are very astute at noticing things wrong with people. Very opinionated. And so you make this list of it. The book says people, institutions, or principles with whom we are angry. So that's the first direction. The second direction, after we list the whose, is the why, the cause. And I love the way the book presents this. It's just little bullet points, very important, because I'm the kind of guy, I want to write like essays about what this person did. I want to spell it out in such detail that when I do my fifth step and my sponsor finds out what they did to me, he's going to get the boys together and go over there and straighten them out. You know, I want you to hate who I hate the way I hate who I hate. And so it's just bullet points, just little bullet points. And the third thing is we're looking for the aspects of self that had been, the book uses 5 terms: hurt, threatened, injured, interfered with at the top of the third column on page 65, affects or affected. And it gives you the example. Is it my self-esteem? Was it my security? Was it my ambitions? Was it my personal relations? Was it my sex relations? Was it my pride? And it's aspects of self that were hurt, threatened, injured, interfered with. Well, what you just did by those 3 columns is you've just documented how mistreated you've been at depth. You know, where you just, oh my God, has anyone ever suffered so much for so many, so often, for so little? I mean, you know, you just look at, but that's not, if that was all we did, you'd get sicker doing those first 3 columns. But we have to lay it out there. They trick you. See, they don't tell me that what I'm listing is my judgments and my opinions. But that's really what I'm doing. I'm putting my ego out on the table, because that's what my ego does. It creates separation. It creates judgment. It grandizes itself at your expense. And so, the fourth thing it does, before it introduces me to the fourth thing, it spends all of page 66 where Bill's trying to sell me something. He's trying to sell me a shift, a willingness to change my point of view. He's talking about how the truth, how this stuff is killing me. How these resentments shut me off from the sunlight of the Spirit. And in that separation, the insanity of alcohol can and often and sometimes does return. We can drink again. To drink for us is to die. Do you ever notice, you might have a resentment that you haven't even seen the person, you haven't thought about them for 2 years, and somebody mentions their name, and your light dims, right? It just, And this is crazy. I've experienced this many times. I can have a best friend, and if they say that they like someone I resent, no, they're not my friend anymore. I resent by association, right? So it's a horrible thing. So we spend most of this page trying to buy the proposition. This stuff's deadly. It's killing me. I must be willing to go to any lengths to get free of this. And down towards the bottom of the page, a couple inches up from the bottom, it says that is it true? It says we were prepared to look at these from an entirely different angle. Are you? Or do you still need to be right? Because you can't be free and right at the same time. Wouldn't it be nice if you could? Are you willing to change your mind? You know, the word penance that's used in religion sometimes, Comes from a Latin word, pense, meaning to think. When you repent, you rethink something. You're going to change your point. You're willing, you don't know what is right or wrong here, but you're willing to consider the possibility that you're wrong. Are you? Or is your ego so defended that you can't be wrong? Because if you can't be wrong, you're going to have a hard time in recovery. So are you prepared to look at these from an entirely different angle? And then it says something very interesting, and it's so true. It says we can't wish these, after it tells us they're killing you, it says we can't wish them away any more than alcohol, and you can't. So what do? The book says, this was our course. It's really the only course it gives us. All the great transformation in my life came from this next two sentences. And it's asking me, at my innermost self, to make a realization. This is not cognizant, can you kind of see? This is, do you get it? Do you connect the dots? Chamberlain used to say all the time, this is an inside job. We're in this process of, as Chamberlain would say, of uncovering, discovering, and discarding. So we're looking for, this is the discovery. Are you prepared to look at these from an entirely different angle? And if that's true, then it tells you how. Two-part realization. This was our course. And then the first part's easy. And Wilson's funny like this. I don't know if he's intentionally giving us the easy thing to hook us in, and then the hard thing next, once we're hooked in on the first one. I don't know. But he gives us the easy thing first. It says we had realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Yes, they are. And they're stupid too. You know, you just, where's Dr. Kevorkian now that we need him? You know, let's put them out of their misery. Yeah, they're sick. The ego loves that. The ego's on board for that. Anything where it puts me here and you down here, anything, the idea of me being a well person, pathetically looking down on a sick person. That's why I don't ever recommend the prayer in the story in the back of the book where you ask God, because it's hard, it's not in the spirit of what we're trying to do here, where you ask God to give them, to pray for someone you resent, you ask God to give them everything you want for yourself. Well, there's a sense of spiritual and smug superiority in that. You know, I'm gonna pray for the pathetic, unfortunate person. You know, it's an ego-feeding proposition. And we're trying to do ego reduction here to get smaller. And so the first part's easy. We realized how this person was perhaps, this person was spiritually sick. And then it starts to get a little more definitive. And then it says, even though you don't like their symptoms, what symptoms? I've conceded that they're spiritually sick, and now they're telling me you don't like their symptoms, do you, Bob? What do they mean? The second column, the bullet points. Do you mean to say that the things that caused the resentment are simply the symptoms of a spiritual sickness? Well, let's do it. Let's turn it around. Find the person that you feel the most guilty about, that you hurt the worst. I had a lot of those. I had a lot of shame when I got sober. Did you hurt them intentionally because you wanted to hurt them, or did you hurt them because you were driven by fear and selfishness and your spirit was sick? And if that's true for me, why wouldn't that be true for them? So I don't like their symptoms. And I don't. And the next thing it says is, and the way these symptoms disturb me, which is in the third column, the pride, the pocketbook, the relationships, I don't like that. And then here's the kicker. It says we had to realize that this person was perhaps like me, spiritually sick. This is not the position of a well person looking down on a sick person. This is the person of a person that's honest enough and humble enough to look square across the table at another person that's been driven by fear and resentments and selfishness and struggled with themselves in life, and realizing what I'm seeing over here in this person I resent is just me. It's me on a bad day. It might be me with a more abusive childhood, because hurt people will hurt people, but it's me. And all the smug superiority that Wilson talks about in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions starts to dissolve away when you start realizing the truth. That's me. That the person I resented couldn't help being the way they were any more than I could help being the way I was when I was the way I was at my worst. I had a long 8-step list. I hurt a lot of people. A lot of regret, a lot of shame, a lot of guilt. But truly, there was not one person on that 8-step list that I set out intentionally to destroy. They just happened to get in the way of my sickness. They tried to interfere with me. They wouldn't give me money, and I needed money, so I robbed them. It was all self-centered, fear-driven stuff. And so if that's true for me, can I allow that to be true for them? One of my favorite prayers, and I really like the pre-Christian version that came out of the Hebrew of the Lord's Prayer. And in that prayer, it says something that I think is amazing. It says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. There's an implication there. You want to stop beating yourself up? You want to stop suffering from depression? You want to get free? Free them. Free them. Take them off the hook, and you'll take yourself off the hook. But I want to free me and keep them in prison. The problem with keeping them locked up is you got to stand guard at the door for the rest of your life. That the person who had harmed me was perhaps like me. And I think for some of us, we flip it. We flip it. And all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, I started looking at my childhood through my mother and father's experience, not through mine. It's different. It's different. I started looking at my relationships, how I always judged them. And she rejected me. She went with somebody. And I started looking at it through her eyes. What would it have been like to be with me? The bosses that fired me. Started looking at it through their eyes. And in a world that seemed horribly unfair and unjust, what I started to wake up to was the truth. My mother and father hung in there with me for years. And if it was turned around, I wouldn't have put up with 1/10 of what they put up with. I wouldn't have spent on lawyers and therapists and bail bondsmen 1/10 of what they spent trying to help me. I'm too selfish. And I never acknowledged that. I never looked at what it must have been like to be on the other side looking at me. And what I started realizing is, oh my God, the world's not unjust. They've been fairer and more tolerant and more accepting with me than I would have been. I couldn't understand why some of the girls that eventually rejected me, how they gave me the second chance. I wouldn't have. The boss that didn't fire me when they should have fired me gave me another chance. I wouldn't have. See, the only unjust, the only idiot in this life has been me. People have been very, very fair to me. Isn't that odd how I get sober and I'm a victim? And I'm not a victim. I'm the guy. And I never saw it that way before. Clancy used to say that this was a disease of perception. And this is the beginning of changing my perception of life. Because you're not going to change life, but you're going to change your view of life. There was a guy with with a young daughter that was about 3-4 years old. He's got the day off, and he's wanted to just sit, and he's got this easy chair, sit and read the newspaper. Just relax. Well, his 3-year-old daughter wants some attention. So she's bugging him. Daddy, come on, Daddy, play with me. I can't, sweetheart, can't I just read the paper? No, Daddy, come on, Daddy, play with me. And in the back of the paper, on the back page, there's an ad for an airlines. And it shows, it's a map of the world. It shows where this airline flies. And he gets an idea. She's 3 years old. He tears that back page off, tears it up into little pieces, gets a roll of Scotch tape, says, sweetheart, here's a map of the world. If you tape this together, come back, I'll play with you for the rest of the day. And he goes, she don't even know what map of the world looks like. This is amazing. I'm going to be free the rest of the day. 20 minutes later, she comes back and it's all taped together. He goes, my God, how'd you do that? He said, oh, Daddy, it was easy. On the back was a picture of a man. When I put the man together, the world just fell into place. I heard that story probably 45 years ago, and it stuck with me. Because isn't that what we do here? We change us, and the world seems to change. But it's really us that's changing. Did you ever go back and visit? You might have had a resentment towards your childhood religion, and you're sober a couple years, and you go back and check it out. I did. I went to my childhood religion. I thought, my God, they've changed. They didn't change. I changed. I thought my parents have changed. They didn't change. I changed. And that's the amazing alchemy of Alcoholics Anonymous. You don't have to suffer from yourself anymore if you're willing to do the work. So after This Was Our Course, there's a prayer. And if you've done This Was Our Course and not placated it intellectually, but really done it, you've taken these people off the hook and you're seeing yourself in them. And maybe you're beginning for the first time in your life having a little bit of compassion for the people you judge so harshly. Compassion comes from two Latin words, cum, meaning with, and passio is the root word of pain. When you have compassion, you have an ability to sit with their pain. In other words, I get it. I get you. I understand. And for the first time in some of our lives, we see things completely different. And now there's a prayer. And if you've done This Was Our Course, it's a really good, legitimate, natural prayer. If you haven't done This Was Our Course, there's going to be an internal resistance against it. You're not going to really, truly mean it. And the prayer is we ask God to help us, to help me, to show these people I've judged so harshly the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. See, if I'm awake and I realize that this guy couldn't help being the way he was any more than I could help being the way I was when I was the way I was. I was talking to a guy one time. He couldn't take his dad off the hook. Just couldn't do it. He said, well, he's just angry all the time. I don't like being around him. I said, yeah, I know. It's difficult. I said, what if you discovered that your dad had a brain tumor and it was pressing on his brain and it was what was making him angry and why he reacted that way? And you realized, oh my God, he can't help it. He has a brain tumor. I think spiritual, emotional, mental illness of the type that we seem to generate within ourselves is very much like that at times. I did some horrible things. Did I mean to? No. Could I not do it? No. I was out of control. Driven, the book says, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-pity, and we step on the toes of people, or of our fellows. And of course they retaliate because that's what happens. And then it says something that we're going to find true in step 4. That we will invariably find that at some time in the past, I've made decisions based on self, which put me right there. That created the opinionation and the judgment and the separation. It put me in that position to be hurt. So I'm the maker of my own misery. I'm the creator of my own separation. When I stood on a bridge in 1978 trying to get up enough courage to take my own life, if someone in AA that I knew from the treatment center would have come along and said, "Bob, what the hell are you doing? You're going to kill yourself? You need to treat your alcoholism." I remember I wouldn't have thought it was, it's just not alcoholism. I've been to hundreds of meetings. It's not alcoholism. It felt like I was dying of loneliness, this anxious apartness, this being lost in a world that I don't fit in, this inability to connect in a world where I watched everybody connect with each other, and then there's me. And so this is where we start to reduce some of the separation. And we do it through compassion, we do it through understanding, we do it by awakening. I think one of the great promises in Alcoholics Anonymous is read at every meeting, and I don't even think most people realize it's a promise. It's in step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result. We don't know what you're going to believe. We don't know where you're going to work. We don't know who you're going to marry. We don't know any of that. But we do know one thing. There's some light inside of you that's going to wake up. And you're going to look at the world differently. In a world that used to be hostile and just difficult, it's not going to be so difficult. And it's not going to be so hostile. It may still at times as your ego returns. But for the most part, we've tapped into a source of freedom. And then the very last thing after the prayer, it's in the last thing, this was the one thing, the fourth thing we write, it says something very interesting. It says, we reviewed our conduct over the years past. No, wait, I'm in the wrong page. Never mind. We reviewed. It says that we, putting out of our minds the wrongs they had done. So in other words, I can't hide my selfishness, my resentments. I can't hide my stuff and justify my stuff with what you did. Oh my God, we're masters at that. We want to explain ourselves. That's one of the horrible things I've had to try to overcome in my own marriage is if my wife and I get in a little conflict, I'm willing to make amends, but after I explain it. Bad deal. That's a bad deal. Because it feels on the receiving end of the explanation, it feels like they're not really serious. And so it says, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely look for our own mistakes. And a couple lines down, it says the same thing again, because Wilson's very serious about this. We disregard the other person involved entirely. I have been a master at hiding my own selfish, vindictive, self-seeking, self-grandizing behavior in the shadow of what I found wrong with you. It's an art form for me. And the book's asking me to stop it. Stop it, Bob. Try to be a grown-up here. Stop trying to justify yourself and rationalize and explain it. Just own it. That's not that easy. When you have a head that just goes, yeah, but blah, 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 blah. And they need to know this. They need to know this because it would change the thing. If they need to know. They need to know. And then you try to tell them and you realize, no, that was not a good idea. That was not a good idea. The real freedom from the bondage of self is when you just stand up for yourself and you don't have to explain yourself or defend yourself ever again. Pretty amazing. And after I did this first inventory out of the book, my whole life was different. I remember, after I did two before that, and, if you ask me, I said, well, what did you learn, Bob? What's the exact nature of your wrongs? I said, well, I stabbed the guy. I stole some stuff. I had the immoral inventory. After I did this one, I would have said, I found out I was really wrong about my mother and my father. I was really wrong about my exes and my bosses, and I was really wrong about the police, and I was wrong about everything. I was just wrong. And that is massive ego reduction, because I don't know about your egos, but my ego wants to be right. I mean, there have been times in my life, I don't even care if it kills me, as long as after I'm dead, everybody goes, oh yeah, but that Bob was right, man, I'll tell you. That's pathetic. How many of us, driven by self-pity or self-centeredness, will cut off our nose to spite our face? How many of it, I'll show you, I'll kill me. I'm going to go out in the garden and eat worms. You'll be sorry. You will be sorry. I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room that's done just emotionally just amazing deathbed speeches. Unbelievable. And everybody in your life just goes, we didn't know, Bob. We were so wrong about you. I want to make you wrong because I need to be right. And we don't grow from being right. If you grew from being right somewhere, you would think somewhere in our literature it'd say, and when we were right, we promptly admitted it. It doesn't say that. It's when we were wrong, we grow spiritually by our willingness to be wrong, because it's what reduces the self-centeredness, the ego. I never grow spiritually by being right. Be nice, but it's not so. Why don't we take what are we doing?
Meant to go to our 12. 12:15?
Oh, do we go to 12:15? Never mind. So the next part of the inventory is fear. Now I'm sure there's people in here that don't have any fear. I didn't. I had a lot of fear. I was driven by it. Fear was such a driving force in my life that I just normalized it. Silkworth says something in the doctor's opinion he says we can't differentiate the true from the false. To us, our alcoholic life seems the only normal one. I can normalize being high anxiety worrier, that my neurosis is normal. Nothing wrong here. I can normalize things that aren't really, that's not what God's plan was for me, to be that way. But I am that way, and so I normalize it, because I can't change it. And what I can't change, I normalize, because I don't know what else to do. But we had to have God's help. God can change us. The problem, God, you get into step 6 and 7, we're not there yet. But if you get into that, God does do things in your life. But he does them very slowly, because he's old. It's slow. It's like a glacier drifting across the land. It's just, and that's not good for people that are impatient. And one of the things that Harry Tiebout said, he talked about the impatience of the alcoholic, and he talked about tolerance and impatience. He equated the alcoholic's ego to His Majesty the baby, divine ruler of the universe. That's why I'm impatient, because I think it's beneath my station as royalty in the universe to wait like other people have to wait. Do you ever find yourself at the Department of Motor? I used to find early sobriety. I made a line, 200 people, Department of Motor Vehicles. I was the only one in that line. Angry. I'm not even awake to the fact there's 199 people that are just waiting like I am. Yeah. It's me. I'm the inconvenienced one here. And he says that comes from His Majesty the baby. And intolerance. Do you ever just get annoyed by people? I do this. I'll admit this. My wife has seen this. It's not good. It's not. I'm not proud of this. But I'll be at the airport, and if someone's walking down a little thing in front of me and they're slow, I just get annoyed, you know. If you lost a little weight, you wouldn't be so slow. Or, you know, it's horrible. Oh, horrible stuff. Horrible stuff goes through my head. Just horrible stuff. All right. Well, that's who I am. But we get better at this stuff because you start to develop some compassion and understanding of others, you know. We're all truly, we're all doing the best we can here with what we have to work for, what we have to work with. Sandy Beach said something, and it was an offshoot of something that Chuck Chamberlain said. And Chuck said it, that the guy who committed rape and the guy who was feeding the poor at a church were both doing the best they could with how awake they were. I remember the first time I heard that, I thought, no, that's not right. And Sandy used to say the same thing, only he said it, we do as well as we can for as how awake we are. When you're awake to more and you see more and you're aware of more, you can do more. And you can't until you can't. Chamberlain used to say it all the time. He said, you can only see what you can see when you can see it. There have been times, in my early sobriety, there was things I just couldn't see. I had problems with people. I had problems with situations. And I couldn't see what was going on. I can now in hindsight. My hindsight's 20/20. I'm a little myopic in the present sometimes. But you can only see what you can see when you can see it. And we grow here by our mistakes. And so I had to make a fear inventory, which at first I didn't think I had any fears. I remember telling this guy that. I said, you know, I'm doing it. I was 4 years sober. Did a resentment list. Good, now I'm working on the fear. And I just drawing a blank. I had a lot of fear when I first got sober. Fear of going to prison, fear of being homeless, fear of not having a job. You know, I had a lot of stuff. Fear of my past catching up with me. Fear of never being able to make an amends. But a lot of stuff was put to rest. I was good. I was pretty good. And I said, I just don't have any fears. And he looks at me and he goes, really? I said, yeah, I don't have any fears. He said, could I ask you some questions? I said, yeah, I should have ran out of the room. I said, yeah. He said, are you afraid of rattlesnakes? Oh, yeah, everybody is. Well, we're not talking about everybody. We're talking about you. Angry, barking dogs. Yeah. Black widow spiders. Yeah. Are you afraid of being embarrassed? Are you afraid of people finding out stuff about you that you're ashamed of? Are you afraid that everybody's going to realize you're the loser you think you are? Are you afraid that no one will ever love you? Are you afraid you're going to die old and alone? That you're not going to be able to take care of yourself? And he just kept hitting me with these things. And then when he's done, after about 5 minutes, he finally said to me, so, is there anything you're not afraid of? And I was like, how do you do that? It's like some kind of spiritual jujitsu, you know. I went into this thinking, I don't have any fears, and I'm shot through of fears. Our very fabric of our existence is shot through with it. And fear, there's a thing in the book, and it's so true. It says that fear can set in motion trains of circumstances that will bring you more problems and more misfortune that you don't feel like you deserve, but did not Bob set the ball rolling. What does that mean? Well, that's what psychiatrists refer to as self-fulfilling prophecies. Is that, I tell you an example. I was, my first sober relationship, it's a stretch even calling it a relationship, really, but I'm new and I'm like a year sober, and this girl's like 90 to 100 days sober, and she liked me, which, if she liked me, that's amazing to me. I mean, oh my God. And I was obsessed with her. And my sponsor told me to stay away from her. He said, she's really sick. I looked at him, I said, Dick, you know, we're all sick here. Yeah. I said, I think she's my soulmate. He started laughing. And he said, why could you think that? I said, listen, this made perfect sense to me. I drank this cheap $1.10 a quart wine called Richard's Wild Irish Rose. It's never been 50 miles close to a grape. This is just neutral grain spirits and flavoring. It's a bit 20% alcohol. And she drank that same wine. He couldn't see the connection. Oh my God. I thought he's an idiot. He couldn't see. This is kismet. And I'm afraid. And the fears captured my perception. And instead of trying to surrender my perception and align my will with God's, I'm trying to fantasize that God's come to his senses and he's aligning the universe to me. And that is a level of selfishness that I didn't even understand that I was capable of. That I can play God. And fear drives guys like me. I've lost jobs. I've quit jobs because of fear. Because I'm afraid they're going to fire me. Now, they weren't going to fire me. I just misinterpret their body language or something. Or I'm one of those kind of guys, if I do something nice at work and you don't make a big deal out of it, screw you. You know, I'm quitting, right? Oh, it's horrible, horrible. I start imagining things. I start imagining that you're against me. I've ruined jobs, relationships, friendships, all kinds of stuff in my life just because of what I think. Isn't it funny you think stuff like that? Have you ever, in the middle of building a case against someone, stop and ask your head, what's your source of information here? Just make stuff up. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, I step on the toes of my fellows. And they retaliate. Of course they do. Of course they do. I would. Wouldn't you? So I am the cause. I am the maker of my own misery. I am the culprit in my life. I am the source of my demise. And all the justification, all the explanation, all the rationalization, all the self crap doesn't change it. If you sent a CSI team into every problematic area of my life since I've been sober and even before, you're only going to find my fingerprints and my DNA. I'm the guy. Isn't it crazy? It's crazy that I can destroy myself and make it your fault. I mean, that's crazy. Well, if you hadn't, I wouldn't have. You know, what are you talking about? And so I'm driven by a lot of fear. And I get these fears. I'm afraid this girl I was dating, I was afraid she was going to go with somebody else. So what happened? Fear drove me. Drove me to driving by her apartment in the middle of the night, peeking in the windows. I'm embarrassed to tell you that. I went through her purse. They didn't have phones in those days, or I'd have been in her phone. I'd have been on her Facebook. They didn't have that stuff. But I'm in her purse looking for guys' phone numbers. If I saw her in a meeting, she was hugging some guy. I'd go, hey. I'd pull the guy out of the meeting and say, you don't be hugging my girl. You know, I was crazy. And my sponsor said, you're going to drive her away. And I did. And I made the fear come true. And the fear was she was going to leave. And I wouldn't stop until I made the fear come true. I've quit jobs like that. I'm afraid you're going to fire me. So I'll change my attitude until you fire me. I'll show you. Driven by self. Let's take, how long of a break?
We can have an hour and a quarter.
Hour and a quarter. Yeah. So we're coming back at 1:30. Oh, can I have this? Yeah. See you back at 1:30. Where?
Second, quick announcement.